Come back. Well, various conversations last week after it emerged that Ace Magashule's new political party, the African Congress for Transformation, had announced that Mthandazo Ntlhameza would be its leader in the Eastern Cape. Ntlhameza was previously the acting head of the Hawks. While he was in that position, a judge made a finding that he had lied under oath and was a man without integrity. After that, the police minister at the time, and Nkosinati Ntleko, then appointed him head of the Hawks permanently. In the end, he was forced out of the position in 2017. All of this shines a spotlight on the importance of leadership in the police and units like the Hawks. It comes at a time when the police minister has today been talking about political violence in KwaZulu-Natal and how important policing is to end that. Gareth Newham is the head of the Justice and Violence Prevention Cluster at the Institute for Security Studies. Gareth, good afternoon to you. What kind of state were the Hawks in when Mthandazo Ntlhameza left the Hawks? You've been in charge for several years. What did he do to the Hawks while he was in charge?
Yes, Stephen, he was appointed in an acting position in December 2014 and left, as far as I understand it, towards in the middle of or early 2017. So he was there for about 3 years, or 2 years, in fact, just over 2 years. One stark indicator is in the sort of first 2 years that he was there, the ability of the Hawks to undertake investigations that resulted in convictions dropped by 71%. So when he took over, they were able to secure in the region of around 4,000 convictions annually, and when he left, they were only able to secure just over 1,000. So he was extremely damaging. He replaced 60 people. He brought in very questionable people who didn't have the necessary skills or integrity and put them in leadership positions. He interfered in operations, interfered in various investigations into corruption. He was seen as a bully. The morale of the unit collapsed. Many of the really good people were forced out or left. So he really did serious damage to the Hawks while he was there.
And the problem with that is that he appointed people, which means that some of those people, a bit like in the NPA, could still be there. They run slightly differently, but it still means that the damage that a leader creates to a policing unit lives long after they leave.
Yes, absolutely. So, the damage, first of all, is that the leader in a policing organization or a relatively hierarchical organization will set the tone, will determine how people speak to each other, the values that they practice, the conduct that you'll expect from them. And if they behave badly or seen as dishonest or incompetent, then it'll become a bit of a free-for-all. Accountability mechanisms will start collapsing. As I said, good people will leave, bad people will get into key positions. So it becomes a bit of a snowball, and then you have an organizational culture in which people don't trust each other, where people don't feel like they're being held accountable or can do what they like, particularly if they're linked to the leadership or have been appointed by the leadership. And that really is difficult to change. It's not something you quickly change because, as you said, you can bring in a new head who then has to go through the whole process of trying to remove key people around them. And that, they might be there for years. Our labor laws are not don't look kindly on situations where there's evidence of misconduct going back many years and no action was taken. So often these new leaders' hands are pretty tied, and the approach hasn't been what we've seen so far in terms of trying to strengthen various organizations, an institutional-wide approach. In other words, where you really look at this institution and say, what are the practices, the organizational culture that's in place, the extent to which it's really, strategic, it's using its capabilities effectively, and then help a new management team, because you can't expect one person at the leadership level just to simply fix all of this quickly. There needs to be a whole of organization approach to sort of strengthening it, and I think that's where the shortcoming has been. So there's been a lot of work done in the Hawks to try and move some of these people out. A lot of them have been moved out, but it has been a very slow and frustrating process. And as you say, there are probably still people there that were appointed who shouldn't be there, but it's very difficult to remove them for the reasons I've outlined earlier. So
Godfrey Lebeer took over, and like at SARS, there was Tom Moyane at SARS, of course, various commissions have made, at least one commission has made findings against him there. And SARS, Edward Kieswetter took over. He was able to make changes. We saw more money coming into the fiscus. Godfrey Lebeer took over at the Hawks. Have we seen more convictions as a result?
They do seem to be doing much better. As you would have noticed, probably that Godfrey Lebeer gives quarterly feedback sessions. He gives media or press statements where he talks about the caseload that they're carrying, the numbers of convictions, and that certainly does seem to have improved while he has been there. I still think he's facing a huge challenge, largely because of resources. They're operating at just around, or what's been reported before Parliament, around only half the posts that they need to operate effectively. They have full, so they've got about 50% of their staff capacity. And of course, we're talking about specialized investigations into, network organized crime, grand corruption, people working with, clever lawyers and financial experts and accountants to hide money that they've garnered through, money laundering and corrupt activities. Those people are not in huge supply, and it takes some time to really develop them. So it's not something you can just quickly fill overnight. And I know he's been complaining about the lack of capacity for some years now. So I think there have been improvements in the Hawks, but I still think that if you compare the Hawks budget, for example, to the VIP protection unit, that was a big story a while back. The VIP protection unit gets more money than the Hawks to protect 250 people, plus or minus, whereas the Hawks are going to deal with organized crime and corruption in the entire country. So you already see there at a kind of very high political strategic level that the focus is wrong. There's not a clear strategic direction on how to fix policing. The budget's not reflecting the priorities of the crime challenge we face. And that's where the challenge continues, I think, particularly when it comes to policing in South Africa.
So we know, and I think you've written this on the ISS website, that our murder detection rate, in other words, murders solved by the police, is around 15%. In other words, if you commit murder, you've got an 85% chance of getting away with it. I suppose that's one way of looking at that number. There must be a link between how the Hawks and the police have been led over the years, the resources that we give them, and that incredibly low murder detection rate.
Yes, well, in 2012, the National Development Plan was adopted by government and welcomed by most parties, and it said that there's a serial crisis of top management in the police, and put forward a number of practical recommendations to deal with this crisis. They could see that there are too many people there that should not have been appointed there, that there was a lot of infighting, a lot of mistrust, there was no strategic coherence to what the police were doing, because there have been so many changes in the levels of police minister and police commissioner over the years. So they said there should be a national police board, an independent, multi-sectoral board of experts that can look at what needs to happen to really strengthen that leadership cohort. Because we're looking at about 150 generals now, about 600 brigadiers. That's your top echelon of this mass organization of 186,000 plus people. And those recommendations were never implemented. And the consequence of that was that between 2012 and last year, 2022, despite their budget increasing by 86.5%, the ability to solve murder has dropped by 55%. The ability to solve armed robberies has dropped by 53%. And the ability to solve most violent crime across the spectrum, when you take all violent crimes and put them into a single contact crime category, has dropped by about 24%, about a quarter. So that means much greater resources going to the police and far worse performance. So that last year, as you said, 85% of murder dockets were not detected. They were not closed as solved. And only 10% of armed robbery dockets were detected. So 90% went unsolved. If you look at the current 108 billion rand budget, 186,000 people, I'm sorry, that kind of performance should not be acceptable. And what's very worrying is that it started in 2012, and every single year it's gotten worse. But there's been no response to try and change or fix this. So here we are 10 years later, 11 years later, and the numbers of murders, from the most recent statistics, annual statistics we have, is 60% higher than it was 10 years ago. In other words, last year, over 10,000 more murders occurred than was the case in 2012. This is not necessary because we have some of the best police officials, men and women in the world, because of their experience in the South African Police Service. We've got huge support, or people would like to support the police from the private sector, from academia, from across different sectors. But we don't see that kind of strategic approach. I mean, what is the plan to stop this deterioration in detections, to really strengthen the detective services? There was a plan in 2013. Why are these plans not being implemented? And I mean, that goes back to the leadership issue. So there are a lot of questions that need to be asked, but unfortunately, time is running out. We can't see this kind of deterioration to continue for much longer before the 27% of people who say they trust or have some trust in the police even falls further, in which case, the police simply are not able to really make a difference in improving public safety because of these issues I've just mentioned.
Sure. Gareth, it's a very, very difficult picture that you paint. We've seen the Police Minister, Becky Cele, and the Provincial Police Commissioner in KwaZulu-Natal, General Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi, talking today about political violence there. They say they want to look at special courts to deal with political violence. We've seen political violence and political killings, I should use that phrase rather, in KwaZulu-Natal being a consistent problem for many years. Is leadership in the police, or policing generally, in KwaZulu-Natal part of that problem too?
Well, I think again, it's sort of how are these resources being used? The press briefing today on political killings was quite positive in the sense that there were, quite a large number of cases that have been solved before the courts. We saw examples of people going to prison for long periods of time. So clearly there is, active work being done by this task team, and they are trying on certainly improving the situation from what it was before they were established 5 years ago. But the question still remains is, if you look at what's been happening in KwaZulu-Natal particularly, it's a province that has experienced the highest murder increase in the last 5 years across all provinces. It's really gone up quite substantially when you look at the murder rates in the traditionally high murder rate provinces of the Eastern Cape and the Western Cape. The Western Cape seems to be improving. The Eastern Cape, has always been a problem, but KwaZulu-Natal has really leapt to the fore when you look at organised crime and political killings. So clearly the work of the task team is not adequate, and I think that's one of the problems, is that it's seen as something that a task team should do, rather than all police officials in KwaZulu-Natal should be working on. And of course, the big question is what's happening with crime intelligence. There's been virtually no briefings, no public statements whatsoever that I've come across about how crime intelligence is being improved, how the many people who were brought into crime intelligence by, now criminally convicted Richard Ndluli headed the division or interfered in the division for many years, even after he was suspended. He brought in something like over 200 people that didn't have the necessary skills and experience. Have those people been removed? Have the links to organized crime that some crime intelligence officers are involved in, have they been removed? We've had this big scandal recently that the second most, senior person in crime intelligence, who's also head of counting crime intelligence, had his ticket to the EFF Gala rally paid for by somebody who's linked to organized crime in the cigarette industry. Why is that even possible? How could that possibly even happen? And so I think we need to see a lot more focus and attention being given to the question of what is happening in crime intelligence, because when you want to bring down murder and improve public safety substantially, you need to understand the networks. It's not that, there's just thousands of people committing murders out there. There's a relatively small number of people involved in organized crime if you look at the population of the country. They're highly networked. They work in specific ways and modus operandis. And there are various strategies that have been proven successful internationally, but for some reason we're not applying them. And part of the problem is that you need the intelligence capability to be honest and well utilized. It's a large capability. There are almost 4,000 people working in crime intelligence division with a budget of almost 4 billion rand. That's about the same size as the entire NPA. But you never hear anything about crime intelligence. Why is that the case? And when is that capacity going to be fixed, improved, cleaned up, and brought to bear on these challenges? Because we're not going to see substantial improvements in public safety until the police have that capability sorted out. And you never hear anything about that.
Gareth Newham, so many questions. Thank you very much indeed. Really do appreciate the time. The Institute for Security Studies, an expert, as you can hear, on policing and crime. In a moment,